From the boomer originally being a loud mental asylum patient to Lewis being a hate-filled religious man, a lot has changed from concept to reality in the scope of the first Left 4 Dead. The Left 4 Dead series is one of very brief and scattered existence from its release in 2008, its full integration into Left 4 Dead 2 content-wise by 2011, to its final official update in 2013, and the fan-made, Valve-backed Last Stand update in 2020, with just 2 DLCs and a comic addressing the crossover of both groups of survivors and what possibly happened to the OG survivors. Beyond that, it's been pretty much community-driven content that has kept the game's numbers bolstered, alongside solid gameplay, timeless characters, and concrete replayability, becoming a staple in the horde and zombie genres, as well as influencing many games of the last decade and a half. But how different could things have been if designs and ideas never changed from their concept phase? What were some of the ground floor ideas for the infected, the survivors, and even the story, world, and green flu virus itself? Well, we are exploring everything about the first installment today as we get into it. This is the original plans for Left 4 Dead 1. I was going to make this video on both Left 4 Dead 1 and Left 4 Dead 2 changes from conception, but if this video performs well enough, we will do a dive into the developments of Left 4 Dead 2. So turn off restricted mode, subscribe, like, and all that jazz. But it's pretty well known how different the original cast of survivors from Left 4 Dead 1 were from their final designs. Originally shown on the first trailer for the series within the Orange Box collection and subsequent trailers thereafter, having them all look like they were ready for the zombie apocalypse to even doomsday prepper levels, most strapped from head to toe in thick clothing, bandoliers, and rough exteriors, looking less like they were randomly thrust together as a group of survivors when the green flu pandemic suddenly swept the northeastern United States, and more like 4 badasses that were put together because they were designed to be together to quarrel and or bang. But what was so different about our 4 OG survivors in mind, body, and soul though? Having seen the least amount of change is our veteran guy, Bill Overbeck, wearing much thicker military garbs than his final counterpart, not really fitting the narrative of him slaying his way out of Mercy Hospital to get back home and rush to put on his army attire. Again, more like he was prepared and had the time to fully stock up for his second military campaign. His facial hair is also much more bushy and unkempt, his appearance more in line with his feature in Dead by Daylight. He is still the leader of the bunch, and you know him well, using his army expertise to guide his group of survivors. However, originally he had an additional character trait where he was increasingly paranoid of the virus, fearing that any one of his group could turn at any moment due to the unpredictable nature of this particular disease, but promoting fear and dissent in dialogue between your characters in a game centered around teamwork didn't really fit where Valve wanted to take the game. Ironically, this cut form of Bill would see this trait carried over into the church guy's paranoia of the group after he was bit. This change is most apparent when the very first thing we ever see in the franchise is Bill sticking his hands in the bisected corpse of a dead boomer and messing with its bile, smearing it on Francis right after, mentally unaffected by the biohazard he just fingered.
Are you ready?
Zoey was the next in line to receive some changes, looking more like an older version of her final self, but sharper around the edges, more sunken in eyes and red under her eyelids to seem more disheveled, donning more firearms-related apparel as if she was less a film nut college girl and more of a military man's daughter trained to be a zombie killing machine. During the initial Counter-Strike, or what they called Terror Strike zombie mod days, she was also not settled on her iconic pink hoodie, having different colors to attempt to make her more identifiable in the horde-driven environment. Former box arts also showed her with long hair and a red/pink bandana, almost like she was a hippie, possibly to have more of her pink thematic coloring be easily discernible in the hectic gameplay. From the time of conception, she had a completely different voice actress from that of who we knew as Jen Taylor. She was originally voiced by Alicia Guidewell, the voice and face actress behind Portal's Shell, Star Fox's Crystal, and even the Smash Brothers version of Zero Suit Samus. Looks like Zoey has always been destined to be voiced by female badasses in borderline space horror shooters. This original voice of hers can still be heard very scantily when calling for help from rescue vehicles.
Okay guys, help's on the way.
This way.
Sounding older and more charismatically pompous and more confident. Kind of not even resembling the horror movie fanatic young woman that would transform mentally over the events of the games and comic, where she would become this girl by the end of the sacrifice once Bill had died after imparting the lessons of survival on her. Zoey can also be seen as the largest driving factor in character design philosophy based on how the group's dynamic would have originally been. Instead of slight bickering and dialogue to move the characters forward, some interactions would have seen them either straight up hating each other or wanting to bang each other. In Zoey and Francis's case, the latter would have been true for them, having them romantically involved with each other with dialogue to accentuate that. However, during beta testing, Valve devs like Chet Falasek stated that the lines were too distracting for players in the fast-paced point A to point B flow of the game. Instead, she would end up just viewing Francis as a pessimistic idiot kind of uncle.
This is not going well.
Francis, on that note, takes us into completely different Survivor-looking territory, resembling more so the design of the Midnight Riders drummer Ox, more portly in the stomach region with a rounder, less sharper face and a more holly-jolly nose. Also looking less clean, more unkempt, with an unbuckled belt and greasy, long hair and poofier facial hair, looking more cliche and akin to his biker backstory than what we got in the final result, wherein even his vest and arm tattoo had the Hell's Legion logo plastered on to drive home that fact. His tattoos and clothing generally remain the same in the final product, which makes the twin brother dynamic between the first and last design of Francis in the White Life fan series much more entertaining. In terms of his voice, the actor Vince Valenzuela was never changed.
Fat guys over 50, they love me.
He stayed consistent throughout, but they did have to put the pitch of his voice to a lower level.
And it's kind of funny. You know, I hate everything. I hate lawyers. When are they get done practicing law?
As the development team was told that he originally sounded a bit too much like Mad TV's own actor Artie Lang.
All right, on that one I was wasted. So if you're a kid out there and you're considering doing drugs, don't do them for the wrong reasons, just to be cool. Do them because you hate yourself.
So yeah, they had to pitch him down. His height was also toned down, as he was originally towering over other survivors at a tall 6'5", or 195 centimeters or 77 inches for non-US peeps. This was most likely done to make him stand at equal height as other survivors for instant recognizability's sake and consistency of playing different survivors. That way your camera perspective does not change between playthroughs, but also to not mistake him in a quick encounter for a smoker that usually stands a shade taller. At some points, it was shown on scrapped box arts that he would have also donned a mohawk as well, but instead Turtle Rock and Valve decided to shave him all the way down on his scalp down to his Lambda logo. No hair for our hate-filled biker bro. His infatuation with Zoey was also scrapped.
So you're interested?
Ugh, not if you were the last man on Earth.
I could arrange that.
What do you mean by that?
All right! Yeah.
So this may be a reason his largest character trait is hating everything. The dude was just pissed at Valve for taking away ALOT. On the note of hating things and others, Lewis is most definitely the most altered survivor in the OG crew, looking nothing like his finalized design, looking more like the governor from The Walking Dead's bodyguard named, his name was Shumpert? Okay, yeah, the governor's bodyguard named Shumpert. Having experienced the same fate as Beta Francis, he originally had way more hair. This time, Lewis had black curly locks atop his cranium. The dude also looks nothing like his original backstory. The Lewis that we know today was an IT tech that experienced the zombie outbreak from his place of work. His finalized design that we do know reflected that to be a veritable homage to Shaun from Shaun of the Dead, which is ironic considering his original background saw him as the manager of an electronics store just like Shaun. This backstory was scrapped, but this original design of his did not have any hint of him being an electronics store manager, nothing of his former life. He seems like more of a roamer, dirty clothing, unkempt facial hair, gloves, and a bandolier, looking as if he was someone that has long been a part of the zombie-stricken world, like he was a season 4 or 5 survivor from The Walking Dead, or like the cleaners of Back 4 Blood. And he also has a head bandage on his forehead. It's just kinda there. His appearance alone made him feel like a loner with a tough exterior, resembling nothing of the cheerful, bright palette appearance and personality he would exhume in the final cut of Lewis. While we know him as the overly positive yin to Francis's hateful yang, Lewis was originally to be portrayed as an extremely religious and frankly pessimistic individual. This was referenced in the fan film Left 4 Dead the movie, where Lewis's live-action counterpart suddenly drops his positive canter for his beta character philosophy.
God has abandoned us.
On top of him being super focused on religious ideologies, Lewis also seemed to have hated Bill, of all people, in his scrapped beta design, having been referenced to have constantly argued with the aging veteran to a point that players would want to split them up just because of their hostility towards one another. People wanted to break them up just so they would stop being so mean and so vitriolic towards one another.
When things go back to normal, Zoey, Bill, I'm giving you both jobs. Francis, I'm gonna teach your ass how to read.
Go to hell! Hey, Lewis, what were those things called in that video
Foggy.
you
Head
yammer
crabs,
on about?
Francis. You're thinking of head crabs.
Oh yeah.
Watch out!
A head crab. Thanks, nerd.
Yeah, you're welcome, country boy.
Oh shit, woman! Oh shit! Funky smelling bitch! Shit! God damn it! Woody ass bitch!
Thankfully, Lewis's personality was reworked from the ground up and modeled after a coworker of Chet Falisek's named Joe, who described him as having a wholesome and positive demeanor.
There's a guy we worked with at one point, Joe. Joe's the kind of guy who's like, microwave can explode while cooking his food and get all over him, and he'll never get mad. He'll be like, all right, this is the start of this, and now I'll just continue on and figure this out, right? But so wanted to bring that in there where we just had that person who was kind of looking at the positive even in all the negative.
Lewis's final character design reflects this change in personality to shave him down in hair, muscularity, clothing, and more, and for him to have a brighter color palette to match this kind of energy. It's funny that both Lewis and Francis lose some kind of width in their designs, as well as all or most of their hair. The dynamics were completely different between all of the survivors, cutting down both distracting voice lines, repetitive character design traits like being overly hairy, and having the valve filter to kind of, shave down Turtle Rock's original character design shine through pretty dominantly here to make them more well-rounded to be replayable and more likable. But that's those in terms of the survivors of Left 4 Dead 1. But what about the infected they set out to kill by the thousands? The infected, for the most part, had stayed pretty consistent through development, having started out as just slow-moving Counter-Strike bots acting like zombies to evolve into the fast-moving living infected we know today, inspired by a viewing of 28 Days Later. The only major difference that needed to be cut were a wider variety of outfits for the common infected to wear. Beyond just the typical outfits that would go with some of the maps, there would have been a lot more. Although these outfits would be put into the base game of of Left 4 Dead 2 once the Last Stand update came around in 2020. It only took 12 years, but there you go. The largest differences for the infected were on what made them special. The hunter, much like Bill, had seen the least amount of changes to his outward appearance compared to his counterparts. While his appearance is not much different from his finalized vision, it's to note that he shaved his goatee and decided to clean off some of the blood around his face. Considering he is the most common special infected in lore and in spawning capabilities, having him blend in more with the commons of the green flu virus with less hair and blood, I guess, made sense. However, his abilities and vocal dynamics had some concepts and theories surrounding him. While many believed his original grunting and growling sound files were devised as the sound effects for an infected dog, a lack of any concept art and Valve themselves having denied there ever being a green flu canine being what the hunter was originally meant to be. The growls that it emanates simply aligned with what they envisioned for a stealthy infected that could leap long distances to maul a survivor. Its leap is a well-known part of the hunter's kit, allowing it to reach greater heights, traverse vertical areas on the fly, and crash land on survivors with great force. But sometime early in its development was the hunter also supposedly conceived to have the ability to cling to ceilings much like a bat, dangling upside down. Honestly, it would make for more interesting vantage points for the hunter to ambush survivors, being able to leap long distances from high ceilings. However, the amount of high ceilings in the original Left 4 Dead were not too often, and in most cases, very situational. If anything, putting itself in that position with an animation to follow probably would leave it easier to kill, basically putting its head out to be exposed even more than any kind of stance it has right now. Since the game was built with verses in mind from the get-go, it's possible having the player's perspective turn completely upside down when clinging to a ceiling and then attacking frequently. Changing this perspective from upside down to straight up constantly would be way too disorienting, and because of that, it was scrapped very early on. While the concept of him Spider-Manning on a ceiling while growling looks and would feel eerie as hell, it's understandable why this never saw the light of day. The hunter's abilities were also to be way beyond just crouching, pouncing, and wall jumping like the parkour variant he is. Early on, Turtle Rock toyed with the idea that the hunter would have other abilities to make him more fearsome. The first, lending him the unique trait of being able to regenerate health over time if he were to get away. An element never brought forward for any infected throughout the series, and for good reason. If you simply get away as a bot special infected or a player controlled infected, being able to heal up all the way if you just, hide. The hunter originally was also going to have the capability to detach from survivors whenever it wanted, meaning it could pounce someone, jump off them, and then pounce someone else and or leap away to safety. If you were to compound that with the hunter's release kit of being able to do scaling damage with the height of his pounce, if you remember in the first month of Left 4 Dead 1, you were able to do up to 100 or even more damage if you were to jump from great heights, and then freely get to run away and then regenerate your health from any bullets that hit you. That would have been insanely busted. The capability to do tons of damage, get off a survivor, and then regenerate all the health that you had lost from gunfire damage, that would have been broken as hell. The Dying Light precursor himself was supposedly capable of also pushing survivors that drew too close to him while he was standing upright, meaning no matter what, it could leap. The difference being, if it was standing up, it could push people while leaping forward, and then when it was crouching, it could pounce forward and pin you down, so it could either push or pin you. Obvious to see why this was cut, as this would have been easily exploited to yeet people off tall surfaces or put them in the hanging state. Although this lunging, or at least capability of him to jump away while standing upright, stayed consistent for bot-controlled hunters to this day, who, when injured by gunfire, will yelp with pain and then flee in the opposite direction without actually pouncing. You know that awkward jump that they do while they're standing up straight? Yeah, that would have been what you could have done to knock people around. But none of these features compare to the fact that the hunter at one point had one more trick up his duct-taped alpha sleeves, that being camouflage to basically be invisible. While not shown, test footage of zombie classes dictated how he could, quote unquote, fade out of view. Yeah, that's right, basically a chameleon. Yeah, think about that. If the hunter were to go up to a wall and basically go invisible, this would have been disorienting in the kind of playstyle that Left 4 Dead had. Having a special infected with this kind of potential and this amount of abilities is insane to think, especially with the polished and trimmed down form of the hunter we got. As they say, simplicity is key, and it was key here as well. But that's it for the hunter. Jumping out of view to see his longer, lankier, and chain-smoking brother in Claw, we take a look at the smoker's changes over time. We take a look at the smoker's changes over time. Our tall friend was way more into his own naming conventions when initially created. Instead of being a special infected that oozed smoke constantly, his first conceptualized ability was completely centered around becoming smoke. While no test footage ever existed, devs did state that he would have been able to pop in from a cloud of smoke, think Left 4 Dead's ghost mode spawn system, to surprise survivors, manifesting himself from a gas state to a physical state. From there, the OG smoker would have grabbed a healthy human like an anime club friend that forgot how to use deodorant, bellowing to you, "Where's my hug?" Once ensnared by the infected, you and him would disappear into the cloud of smoke where he would drag you meters away to separate and disorient the group. Think the jockey's role, but if the jockey were a Logia fruit user unable to be touched, and then the victim would dematerialize with them to disconnect them from the group. Really stepping up on the broken scale with this one. The concept of an untouchable special infected that could only be shot when appearing and just having a brief few second window to shoot it before it wisps a survivor away to an unpredictable location. This would have been awful with how attention focused it can be during hordes and recognizing threats on the fly. That smoky gameplay cleared out, development still sought to have smoke be a center focus of his kit. The next iteration of the smoker would see to him being able to billow out extremely dark, almost blackened smoke to both nearly blind survivors and to cause gradual inhalation damage. Basically, think the spitter's acid without the scaling damage scaler. So, his original goal was to drop in, smoke out or hotbox the survivors, and cause mass confusion. The smoker also used to have his smoke upon death do something more similar to the boomer, while the current version just plumes out a ton of smoke that slightly obscures vision and causes characters to cough and expose their outlines to player-controlled infected. The OG smoker's head supposedly would explode upon death like a pimple to release the black smoke and knock back survivors just like the boomer's death animation explosion. But that just wasn't going to be playing out for the smoker in terms of fun factor. His original appearance was pretty near and dear to what we know now. The cancerous tumor-like growths all over his head, but originally he was almost plague-like, having these boils and growths populate every inch of his exposed flesh, always leaving only one eye open for him to see, just lacking one important detail. Can you see what the difference is just from this concept art? It was when they decided to give him a more long-range and sniper-like ability that his iconic tongue was made to drape from his cranium. It was immediately devised as a way to drag survivors from afar. However, it did have some growing pains from the get-go. The tongue itself was extremely fast to pull people in, but the survivor also never dropped their weapon to be in the pinned state, meaning there was less of a window to prevent the smoker from pulling you off edges, but you had all of that time to shoot it without being helpless. In that time, the tongue also did not fully hentai around a person's torso. Back then, the tongue was made to wrap around your neck, choking you out. This original idea of only tongue in your neck may be what the sound file of killing a survivor ensnared by the smoker originated from. Instead of the sound of your spine snapping, it makes more sense that this is the sound of your neck taking a break. Much like the hunter, he also was able to release survivors from their pinned attacks freely whenever the player-controlled smoker wished, meaning it could smoke someone for a bit, and if help came from other survivors, it could simply release its tongue to get away. This would have made a player-controlled smoker way more powerful, and honestly, harder to deal with. The point of the smoker and basically any infected that could pin you was the risk-reward dynamic. Pinning a survivor means you expose yourself in exchange for high amounts of damage to the survivor that you hit, if you pull it off in tandem with other special infected or punishing survivors that separate from the group. The ability to just release any survivor at any given time would have diminished this element and made them way too strong. While these ideas were all axed, the smoker, his tongue, and smoke would become a part of his iconography. While he was shorter in the beginning days, smoking did not stunt his growth so that he would stand taller from all the other infected, so that his mere height would make him easier to spot in hordes alongside his now constantly spewing smoke. Now, on the opposite end of the lanky and tall ratio, we now go to the portly and round. The boomer definitely had his own share of a buffet of differences, but nowhere near the amount that the smoker and hunter had throughout concept and development phases. The boomer is known for spewing green bile onto survivors that attracts common infected by the droves. The top half of its torso being expendable to be explodable has also been a consistent element to its bloated nature. However, both of these elements were quite different in the days of Left 4 before. It wasn't originally bile that he vomited out, but purely a stream of copious amounts of high temperature blood, much like a rage infected. And upon explosion, the boomer would also send out dozens of gallons of blood in all directions. During this bloody outburst, both means of bodily fluid projection would actually cause tons of damage to survivors that was hit by it, not blinding survivors or attracting commons. No, just simply boom, instant harm. Think a flamethrower of red hot blood coming out from queso. Sometimes the boomer being positioned where it is made explosions causing damage to all nearby survivors much more irritating to deal with compared to just the vision impairment and horde summoning of today. Sometimes you just cannot avoid the explosion, so taking damage from it was just not fun. So the damage dealing blood would be scrapped, coinciding with the scrapped concept of an entire other special infected. As we all know, there was one famously known as the Screamer. Turtle Rock and Valve had the idea of a special infected wrapped up in an asylum patient outfit with his arms bound that when spotting a survivor would just run away and then let out an ear-piercing scream to call for a horde, much like a car alarm. While other zombie games loved this idea of this Screamer and ran with it in name and concept, looking at you, Dead Island, Riptide, Dying Light, World War Z, 7 Days to Die, and more, Left 4 Dead found that the Screamer was too detrimental to the flow of the game. Having you actively pursue an infected that ran away from survivors, a concept that would later be reused for a small detail for the fallen survivor uncommon infected, this idea was not fun. The Screamer's design itself did not really fit in with what they were creating. You were going against stuff that was going after you. So for you to go after a special infected just to prevent a horde, it was not fun. So the Screamer would be taken to the lethal injection room sometime between 2005 and 2006, sometime before the QuakeCon 2007 demo. The horde summoning mechanic would be harvested from the Screamer's silent corpse and repurposed into the boomer's vomit and death explosion, turning its harmful blood into an alluring bile. During those blood-filled days, the boomer also had a very slight difference in his appearance, simply being paler with more prominent bloody veins on his stomach, most likely to focus its appearance more on how its body now rapidly produced bile instead of just puking blood profusely like he was a member of Gwar. With that in mind, not much was left for the Boomer in his development, except for a minor detail change in the information a player was given during versus mode. During the open beta phase, infected players that played as the Boomer could actually see how many infected could be summoned per each person affected by its bile, appearing as an indicator for the player to see, showing how many commons will be summoned at any given time if you successfully vomit on one survivor. This would change dynamically depending on the algorithm of the AI director, depending on how things are going for the survivors and more. While this is very neat to see how much it could change depending on where and when and how well or worse the survivors were doing, it was just added information that was largely bloated and inconsequential to the infected player. With how rapid gameplay can be and how Boomers largely just needed to go in to blind, confuse, summon a horde, and initiate an attack for their special infected, better to leave that information behind the scenes and not in front of us for the AI director to take care of and let the player have less to stress about. We don't need more numbers thrown at our face. Not waiting for the common infected counter to reach its supposed peak number before attacking, it's the minor details of omission that really add up for the experience that made Left 4 Dead so memorable. In terms of memorability, for most people, the witch is probably what pops up in their head when thinking of unique zombies from this series, and she too had seen some changes. But unlike all her male counterparts, she actually received the least outright adjustments. She was perfect in terms of gameplay execution and design. A frail woman that could go apeshit on you if you drew too close or startled her. It was a perfect way to have players control their fire and think about where and what they were shooting. But did you know that instead of just targeting the one person that triggered her and attacking them until either she or them died, she originally would hunt down and in-cap every single survivor after being triggered? Yeah, she would go to town, and early on, the devs discovered that the witch was easily wiping entire teams in seconds as they struggled to make distance and lay down fire. Run or shoot, Lewis used to say. Bill would say both, but it didn't matter because the witch was slicing them to pieces. All of this while her frenzied attack on down survivors would also have an AOE, an area of effect of damage, where if you got too close to her while she was attacking a down survivor, those long finger blades would cause a lot of damage to anyone nearby, deterring people from drawing close to focus fire on her. This also was deemed too unfair and, more importantly, unfun. So her area of effect damage was completely gone and she was nerfed to target one person, unless she was set on fire by either a gas can or Molotov to change her focus to the person that set her on fire. This could all be the reasoning to why some graffiti in safe rooms throughout the Left 4 Dead campaigns reference how the witch had been seen tearing apart upwards of 10 people at once, leaving in the concept of her group slaying ability as simple writing on the wall, but canonically it's more than likely she will always target multiple people that disturb her. But in the realm of gameplay, the Valve gods had nerfed her mentality to be of a monogamous murder mindset. The witch also used to be a naturally black-haired woman with dark clothing. Nothing else different about her, just all black. I guess someone in the dev team went up and said,
"Why all the black? Why all the pearls? Why all the hair? Why anything?"
So she changed her hair and clothes to be all white in response. Realistically, it was probably to make her easier to spot in dark areas where you would be shining your flashlight, to make her easier to spot and to make her seem much more emaciated to fit in with the opening cinematic, where the crying mixed in with her disheveled state would lure people into thinking she was someone in need of aid. But overall, the witch didn't get much to eat in terms of revisions.
Holy Jesus. What is that? What the fuck is that?
Now, the last of the specials who stays bulked up as the only boss infected did see some variants back in his pre-release days, the Tank. The dude is peak physical condition if you discount the leg day stuff, and he really saw the very least amount of change despite being what was most likely the second special infected ever conceived. What had been different was just minor variances in his total health pool and the speed in which he could pick up and throw debris, and even the concept of him being able to throw multiple rocks at once. And also, the Tank did sound kinda different. It is stated that he had much less hair on his head before he got a little bit of hair put back on, so at least the Tank beat male pattern baldness. Considering the game found its origins in solely focusing around versus mode, it's only fair to make a solid transition into talking about how different it was before going into the guns, supplies, and map changes. Conceiving the game around versus came with its own set of challenges, most notably how to make it fun. Because as that one guy at Nintendo once said,
if it's not fun, why bother?
While PvP mode in any game always naturally becomes ultra competitive and hyper focused on balancing for both sides, the team at Valve and Turtle Rock decided that campaign mode should be made for those that want a more lax playthrough without having to stress about that competitive environment. Things would have been vastly different even from the moment of spawn for Versus if things stayed the way they were from what Turtle Rock had in mind. And that was the concept of being able to choose which special infected you wanted to spawn as, not balancing made by the AI director or randomly selecting what you will play as so everyone gets a fair shake at each special infected. It was just straight up you saying, nah, I'm gonna be Hunter, I'm not gonna be anything else. It's obvious why Valve stepped in to make infected choice randomized, as we did see in the versus mode of Back 4 Blood. The self-proclaimed spiritual successor by Turtle Rock allowed players to choose their special ridden at all given times, and it became the sweatiest, most repetitive experience ever. People choosing tall boys that could grab and the kamikaze exploder over and over because of meta and just plain unfun experiences. That was the Back 4 Blood experience, and the same would have happened with Left 4 Dead 1, and if it even would have happened, Left 4 Dead 2. With 2 people going Hunter and 2 people going Smoker, it would have been people just constantly trying to do that to pin everyone at once, not making it fair. Having infected choice be randomized in tandem with the behind the scenes AI director making all the choices in terms of the infected made for a fresher experience for both teams going back and forth for versus mode while making people get good at every special to learn how they work, instead of leaning on a crutch like picking the same character over and over. On the note of choosing infected to take over, there was a brief period of time where there was an idea of taking control of common infected while you were dead as a special infected, to keep players engaged at all times and to give more playability to every facet of the green flu virus. However, this idea was scrapped as commons were just simply too easy to kill, and honestly was probably more taxing on servers to constantly switch between playable characters. Hell, even the Witch, the only non-playable special infected, was considered to be playable as a secondary boss infected, but due to her rather stationary positioning and static spawn, was too difficult to try and make into a playable feature. The walking of the Wandering Witch during daytime in Left 4 Dead 2 could be the leftover concepts for how a player-controlled witch could have moved around when spawned in. Besides that, Versus largely stayed as it was originally intended in the first game, leaving everything else to deviation in development. The campaigns you runned and gunned in, for instance, saw a large share of restructuring, especially that of No Mercy, which in of itself was originally going to be titled either Urban Underground or Hell Hospital. The apartments you start on the rooftops of were originally going to be a hotel, where you would fight your way down into the streets where a McKay's Market's convenience store would have been. The environment itself would have been much darker in some areas, with lighting being primarily how you would be able to see, mostly from much more light sources of lit windows and buildings, signs, and a much more brighter skybox with a blue tint and fuller moon. The first chapter's ending safe room originally was not found in the subway tunnel, but in a clothing store instead.
Let's get some shoes. Let's get some shoes. Let's get some shoes. Let's get some shoes.
The subways saw some renovation as well, originally being just a bunch of long, linear hallways with no real variation, making the zombies easy to funnel and kill. So basically, the subways were just going to be long and boring. The generator room in which you turn on the door to progress was also non-existent. It was still the generator room that we know, but it did not exist as what we know through the concept of crescendo events, because crescendo events did not exist yet. The room would have simply been a footnote where you could just speed run through to go to a staircase and progress without any slowdown. So no bunkering down in that side room behind the turret. Surface side, the sewers level saw most of its changes near the gas station. The gas station itself would have been a needed, accessible building in the level. In order to progress, you would have to go through the gas station just to get through the level. But the necessity of going inside it meant that some players ended up becoming cooked by the gas station explosion that's basically mandatory in every single playthrough of the chapter. So the gas station was sidelined to circumvent people needing to draw near it to prevent accidental deaths and or trolling from teammates.
Oh no! Oh, someone blew up the gas station when I was too close to it. That was Billy. Thank you, Billy.
The scissor lift also did not originally exist. Again, there was no crescendo events. Instead, the survivors would have accessed the rooftop either via a nearby building and or the gas station, and then breaking open a small vent on the rooftop in order to access the warehouse. Thankfully, this vent was cut, as it would have been a nightmare to navigate with player-controlled special infected. The sewers themselves stayed relatively the same. However, in the alpha, there were 4 separate ways granted to the survivors in order to get into them. This was probably scrapped to lessen the chances of survivors splitting up to go to the path that they were familiar with on repeat playthroughs, with the final total access points being cut down to just 2 manholes. Now, the first finale of the series, The Rooftop, saw a lot of conversion, and I mean a lot. Look at this screenshot of how it was originally laid out. Now, let's compare it to what it looks like now. Can you spot the differences? It was way less spread out and more vertically inclined, with much more structures and buildings and way less open space to run around in, being much more claustrophobic and leaving much less room to breathe to get away from the infected, with even 3-story towers accessible via stairs to get cornered on, or full warehouses to chill on top of, but risk being smoked off by smokers and taking hellacious fall damage from. The environment was also much darker, making seeing infected a bit more tricky, having to rely on lights that are scattered around the environment. The helicopter pilot also had some of his interactions cut. Having originally spotted the survivors on the apartment rooftops, he would have directly instructed them to go to Mercy Hospital for evacuation to a military base. This was cut to just him giving out a citywide alert via megaphone to go to the hospital instead. This dialogue still exists in the files of Left 4 Dead, and is even referenced in the finale when the pilot excitedly states to the survivors, "You made it!" Getting to death toll, not much was changed outside a few minor details. The campaign poster itself shared early designs of the survivors, as well as a different tagline stating this: "When there's no more room in hell, these 4 are gonna make some space." Obviously, it's referencing Dawn of the Dead, but I can see why the tagline was changed, as it was just way too wordy and bloated, like how I write my scripts for these videos. The chapter titles also were all mostly different, being Chapter 1, The Caves, Chapter 2, The Drainage, Chapter 3, The Ranch House, Chapter 4, The Main Street, and Chapter 5, The Boathouse Finale. It would have been interesting to see how that ranch house would have panned out, but it's more than likely it was repurposed to be minor portions of chapters in Blood Harvest. The finale for Death Toll itself would have been way different. Instead of going through those neighborhoods and a little bit of the forest to get to the boathouse, the residential home overlooking the river would have not existed, and instead would have been a small 2-story houseboat. Not a boathouse, but a houseboat. Easily defendable, comparable to the home we got that could have so many parts of it broken open by the infected. As you can see from these early screenshots, there didn't seem to be much of anything else to this finale except the boat and the dock, leaving it to be a very shallow experience that desperately needed to be altered to make it an actual finale event. Imagine going to this tiny boat and just sitting there. While yes, a lot of finales there's always one designated spot, this would have been the most streamlined finale where there was just no other options. Now, the skyline of this map was also altered. Originally, it was just going to be a night sky with nothing else, just infinite darkness in the horizon. Then it was revised to having a burning city to hint at the connection between this campaign and Dead Air. Dead Air had a similar outcome to Death Toll, having not much altered. However, each campaign of Left 4 Dead, it is important to note, has a certain color palette to their environment to set each other apart. You always have these certain color codings or kind of vibe that lets you know what campaign you're in. Kind of like Death Toll had the dark, blue, and gloomy feel. Dead Air, in its final iteration, was its iconic, dark, warm, orange-like vibe, but that wasn't going to be the case, as it was going to be just like Death Toll in tone, being more depressingly blue and dimly lit, as if lit by moonlight. Now, there is a map called Tutorial Standards that also served as a streamlined version of the finale that we know today. It was repurposed of the third chapter of the campaign, originally called The Garage. It was repurposed again by the developers to be a hidden map file in Left 4 Dead that was accessible mainly to aspiring map developers, showcasing all the important elements of making a map, or more importantly, an entire campaign when it came to scripting, map design, panic events, spawn points, and more. It's really neat that a scrapped version of this map was reused to be a condensed tutorial for fan-made level designers. It just had a little bit of everything from the start of the campaign all the way to the finale. Now, on the note of the finale, the runway, it was going to be originally way darker, and I'm not being overly dramatic. The concept of this campaign being a burn-in city was apparently not on the original radar of the devs, as the finale seen here in this early screenshot is pitch black, with the only sources of light coming from a few lights and downed airplanes. Thank God this was changed, as you can probably imagine doing a whole 2-tank finale with luggage carts being flung around in this darkness imprisoning you that all you can see is absolute horror. One would only know. It would have been awful. Now, before the concept of connecting campaigns that were retroactively made into Left 4 Dead, if you didn't know, the campaigns were never supposed to be connected technically until Valve decided in Crash Course that yes, they were. The campaign of Damn It was created to bridge the gap between escaping in the full airplane at the end of Dead Air to arriving in the forest of Blood Harvest. While it is currently playable through the community, bringing it fully to life via what we saw as a bird's eye view of its map design, it is not known entirely why Damn It was scrapped. Turtle Rock had it planned out and had it copyrighted to their studio, but when they teamed up with Valve, Damn It was completely shut down, with Turtle Rock still holding the IP for this specific map. Maybe Valve was offended that they had a curse word that was being used for a campaign, or maybe they felt like 4 campaigns at launch were enough for the dev cycle and they decided to do some trimming. You can tell this campaign was cut very early in development, as the concept poster for it has some rough rough sketches of both the survivors and the infected, with none of the survivors or zombies looking anything near their final designs. Now, the last campaign of Left 4 Dead, Blood Harvest, saw the least amount of changes. In terms of how drastically different previous finales were, Blood Harvest would have originally began with Francis complaining that the airplane pilot was inept, and how could he not know how to land a C-130? This kind of dialogue would eventually be reused in The Sacrifice when Bill remarks on how every single rescue vehicle they got on became a dud, and they needed to rely on themselves. The fog of Blood Harvest was also originally non-existent, making it much more clearer visually, not making it feel like the morning time that we know with that morning dew coming in. The greatest change came with the farmhouse finale. It was due to the fact that it showed no signs of becoming the military outpost that is constantly referenced throughout the campaign and the end goal of the survivors throughout their entire gameplay experience. It would have just been a lush green farmhouse with no discernible traits outside the iconic cornfield. When rescue finally did come to the non-militarized outpost, the rescue vehicle itself was not the armored vehicle that we know and love, but a truck with a minigun on the back, basically reusing some of the trucks that we have seen before. Change in the vehicle did make sense considering special infected canonically existing, and the threat of smoker tongues and open attacks from tank rocks would be much more pervasive for a flatbed truck. The driver of the army car also had cut lines referencing how the farmhouse itself was intended to completely be bombed and turned into scorched earth once him and the survivors escaped. This was most likely cut purely to just save dev time when it comes to putting in your resources. Now, one added note before we get off the campaigns, the Last Stand free survival update, that little map, was 99% the same as it was from concept, all except for the foghorn. Instead of using the lighthouse's sound system to call for rescue, it was going to be just you using the time-honored tradition of a radio walkie-talkie to radio for help. It's way more thematic for the lighthouse to play a more integral role in the bottom line of what happens to the survivors. Although, to the survivors, it didn't really matter since, no matter what in this timeline, rescue is never going to be coming for them, and they are doomed to die. Unless you count the community-made update for Left 4 Dead 2. In terms of what the survivors can do and what they use to do it, has also vastly changed. The incapacitated state, one of the most core components of survivor gameplay, originally did not force you to remain still in the position where you are downed. At first, survivors could crawl around to get themselves out of unadvantageous situations to more easily be picked up by teammates. That, and to bring us further into a chapter in a game about making distance. This was obviously nixed for balancing purposes, as being able to move around as an in-cap survivor just changed the dynamic of being in the dying state. Residual animations of the survivors doing this crawling thing remained within the code of Left 4 Dead 1 to be used in mods and add-ons. Honestly, it is cool to experiment with. I was in a modded server and we got to do this, and it was interesting. It honestly felt like we were Dead by Daylight down survivors, but now we were packing heat. Packing heat means packing weapons.
That's pink. Maybe don't go that way.
Why are you fucking gay? What have you done to me?
And the firearms and throwables of Left 4 Dead aren't what they used to be. But as to what was different, it's mainly magazine/clip sizes, spread, damage stats, and more. Overall, every weapon initially had the muzzle flash from their source, get it, of Counter-Strike. But the flash was changed to make the moment-to-moment gameplay a little less distracting and a little more solid as to not lose frame rate. The pump shotgun's maximum damage was 22 instead of 25. Early files also show how the original ammo counter system would have looked like, depicting shotgun shells that would gradually gray out on the side of the screen as they were shot out. The Uzi submachine gun was at first equipped with a flashlight to make the flashlight mechanic more natural looking instead of just having a random flashlight. It was intended to originally be a direct port of Counter-Strike's MP5N SMG. Evidence of this are in the game files as a price and animation listing, and even in the campaign posters that we can see, some of the survivors hold this scrapped weapon with a scope attached to it. This is also how it sounded. The best weapon, the auto shotgun, is based on the XM1014 from Counter-Strike and originally used sound for the weapon. During development, the shotgun also had 9 shells in the chamber, a larger and less accurate spread with 2 less pellets. This was most likely changed to be more focused and to hit in longer distances to make the shotgun more reliable against not only hordes, but hitting special infected with how critical it is to be able to hit them consistently. The M16 assault rifle is directly derived from Counter-Strike's M4A1, with sound files from the source game being the same but slightly modified during development. The hunting rifle is in a similar boat, lending from Counter-Strike's SIG SG550. On that note, every single gun had a longer and more detailed animation of the survivor cocking the weapon or messing with the firearms in some way to make reloading them more realistic. These more detailed animations were shortened to what we know today purely for how fast-paced Left 4 Dead is. Every second in Left 4 Dead is crucial for a horde-driven experience versus the sweaty PvP shooter experience of using more realistic weapons with Counter-Strike. Of course, the only resource you had as a secondary weapon in the first game were the M1911 pistol. These are intended as a way to always have some kind of offense, even when on the ground or your primary weapon runs dry on ammo. But originally, the pistols also ran the risk of running out of ammunition as well, with a maximum of 240 bullets per pistol. Yes, that's right, you had a limited supply of bullets for your sidearm. Thankfully, this was changed since melee weapons did not exist at this point in time in the series, and the thought of having to shove every single infected to death until you found ammo would have been tiring and frankly irritating. This could have supposedly been circumvented in the alpha of the game, as the concept of giving your extra pistol on hand to teammates, like the mechanic of giving pills, was originally thought up but was ultimately scrapped. Handing pistols to teammates, that's just too much to handle. As seen in the intro to Left 4 Dead 1 as well, Zoey also has flashlights attached to both her dual-wielded pistols, possibly a scrapped concept of both pistols having flashlights, much like the flashlight attachment we mentioned earlier to the SMG. Grenades saw some tweaking or outright replacement, with the pipe bomb showing how the devs saw a problem with gameplay interaction and fixed it. At first, the pipe bomb did not blink or attract any infected towards it before exploding. You know, the whole point of it. So survivors would have had to perfectly time their throw and hope the fast-paced infected wouldn't all run away in time before being turned into a bloody mist. Stated in the developer commentary, it was basically useless for players since infected were always chasing you and doing it fast. That and the infected also originally had collision and hit detection with the grenades themselves, meaning when you threw a pipe bomb into a horde, that throwable weapon had the potential to bounce off of them and land right in front of you, ping-ponging between infected and more, making a large portion of encounters using the pipe bomb ending up blowing yourself up or not hitting any commons at all. It's very possible the pipe bomb was just simply a fragmentation grenade of some sort given its classic game explosive feel, and it's even more apparent since in Turtle Rock's Back 4 Blood that frag grenades were a usable throwable weapon alongside pipe bombs. The pipe bomb was eventually made to have a beeping sound and blinking effect to draw in hordes to actually make it useful in the explosion to actually hit them. While the original concept of the pipe bomb would be repurposed into the oxygen and propane tanks that can explode in the environment, Valve devs stated in interviews that the pipe bomb was also originally intended to be used as a way to combat the tank. Yeah, a way to stun him momentarily and cause large amounts of damage. Ironic, because pipe bombs are now the furthest thing from being anti-tank tools, whereas its counterpart, the Molotov, is the go-to anti-tank weapon. On that note, the Molotov was largely unchanged through development, still spreading fire and catching infected on fire, although it was designed to be in a differently shaped gray bottle instead. This was most likely changed to the brownish bottle we know now to make it more discernible from the gray pipe bomb. The Molotov was also more than likely implemented from the design phases of Half-Life 2, as a throwable Molotov was planned for the game but never incorporated into the series between Episode 1, 2, and Half-Life 2 itself. Maybe mollies can finally be thrown by Gordon Freeman in Half-Life 3.
Oh, a man can dream, though. A man can dream.
As mentioned earlier, melee weapons did not exist in Left 4 Dead, but apparently were considered for a short time. Apparently, developers had to make an ultimatum on their inclusion. They had to either design over half a dozen melee weapons for variety with different animations each, and swing distances, and more, or screw it, just give the pistols infinite ammo. The melee weapons were most likely cut for dev time, but at least melee weapons returned a year later in Left 4 Dead 2. It was still fresh on their mind. Now, gun attachments and even apparel, otherwise dubbed upgrades, were thought up as well for Left 4 Dead. Yes, you could change your survivors and have a different thing that they could do each chapter. Although they aren't ever included, they exist in the original game files and are accessible via commands for survivor_upgrades1 on a dedicated server. They were never referred to in any trailers, press releases, or even developer commentaries. The idea of compounding features for survivors to utilize against the zombie hordes was scrapped pretty damn fast, as it was all just glorified perks. And as we saw with Back 4 Blood's whole gameplay focus, those features lose their luster over time. They're cool to mess with the first few times, but then it becomes too much to manage. And if you think about it, it is another example of Turtle Rock's ideas that seem fun on paper, but just wouldn't work out, and that's why they were filtered out once they were connected with Valve. But here is a brief rundown of everything that was considered for survivor upgrades and perks. First, there was going to be a Kevlar vest that would reduce all incoming damage by a certain percentage, a perk called Prevent It to negate boomer bile once a chapter, ledge save, allowing a survivor to pick themselves up from a ledge once per chapter. Second Wind allows a survivor to recover from the incapacitated state once without aid. Goggles, which negates the boomer bile's blinding effect. Hot Meal, increasing your health all the way to 150. Laser Sight, the same thing we saw brought into Left 4 Dead 2, nothing wrong with that.
The Laser Sight weapon upgrade came from an experiment during the development of the first Left 4 Dead, though we didn't end up shipping them at the time.
The Combat Sling, which reduces weapon recoil on all of your firearms. High Capacity Magazine, which increases magazine size for all firearms. Hollow Point Ammo, which increases weapon damage across all of your firearms. The Knife, that allows survivors to get themselves out of a smoker's pull or a hunter's pounce once per chapter. Smelling Salts, which speeds up the revive animation for when you're picking other people up. Ointment, that allows survivors to run faster when they get below 40 health. Reloader, faster reloading on all firearms. An upgrade called Flash Bulb. It doesn't really have a description, but if I had to make an assumption, it probably just made the flashlight brighter.
Bitch, I can't see!
Especially if you think about how dark a lot of the levels used to be, it might have been necessary. And then last, Blinding Flash. Create and use a flashbang grenade to use against the infected, blinding and stunning them. Hell, even every single door in the game had the mechanic of being able to be locked by survivors, making doors take upwards of 3 to 4 times longer to be destroyed by both common infected and special infected, literally locking player-controlled infected out just to smack at a door for long periods of time and then get shot trying to just play the game. Hearing all of these perks and mechanics read out, god damn, would Left 4 Dead have been a miserable experience on the versus side of things. Oh, what's that? You punished a survivor that ran off on their own? Oh, you idiot! You didn't account for the knife upgrade. Oh, you downed 3 survivors with 2 hunters and a smoker and a boomer? Nah, second wind, they all picked themselves up. Are you trying to attack a survivor as a hunter? Oops, you just got flashbanged in the face back to back by 4 different survivors. It's obvious why these were never mentioned in interviews or promotional material. Valve did not want people knowing about it, and they didn't want people asking for it. Valve saw how unfun this would have been for the general audience and nipped it in the bud. No wonder this bloat of perks and upgrades carried over into Back 4 Blood and how quick things died out for that. It's just going to be way too much to manage and take account of, and makes it more competitive and have people go, you're not using that certain perk? What's wrong with you? Now, don't get me wrong, it would have made campaign slightly more interesting, but it also would have detracted from the whole core experience of replayability and what was, a quick arcade shooter for people to hop in and get into that it's set out to be. Left 4 Dead is to sit down and start gunning. You don't have to think too much. And that last note is the most crucial statement of the entire basis of this video, of what Left 4 Dead could have been. The sheer amount of changes from concept to reality and how different everything was is not a foreign concept to any development cycle in movies, games, shows, and so much more. But here it's obvious how Turtle Rock envisioned the game and were given Valve's expertise to sharpen it and really shave down the edges to make it a smooth experience, to become a classic in gaming history. A lot of elements that were omitted ended up being key features in Back 4 Blood. Character dynamics and appearances were basically what cleaners would be in that game. Survivor upgrades being the perk card system that largely bloated the game and made the quick to turn on and just play nature of Left 4 Dead obsolete with having to make builds and know how each perk works. The nature of each gun, weapon, and layout of each campaign was made to be quick and easy to understand and usable without issue. That's why there's single ammo piles and just a few weapons. You didn't have to think too much. You're like, okay, that's an automatic weapon, that's a shotgun, that's a sniper, that's it. That's all there was to it. Left 4 Dead still has its share of bugs and features all these years later. I will not deny that. Left 4 Dead, it's a 16-year-old game that have bugs that just shine through.
It used to be on Left 4 Dead 1, if you smacked it a bunch, you could just launch yourself.
The infected being discernible wherever you may be and having perfect counterplay versus what we were going to get, especially with the hunter's invisibility powers and pushing people, the smoker's gas form to teleport wherever it wanted, and the damage blood throwing of the boomer. Having things more simplified, less to their kits, readable, and counterable makes it more fun. They were simplified and had less to their kits from the initial concept phase, but it largely worked for the entire gameplay experience. The survivors themselves, down to their appearance, attitude, interactions, and more, were refined to be more realistic, to be more relatable, to be, well, fun to play as. Remember, Left 4 Dead largely is an experience of 95% only these 4 characters, so making their dialogue enjoyable, informative on what's going on around them, and relatable is very crucial. That was very understood in the first game, and especially going into the second game. I cannot imagine having liked them as much if Lewis was constantly verbally violent towards Bill, or Francis and Zoey hitting on each other. If people in the alpha days were separating more purely from what the original dialogue was, I could can only imagine how bad it would have been if it kept till release. People online and my friends already have a hard time sticking together and then running off on their own, but having Bill probably say some borderline messed up shit at Lewis, or Lewis hating on him, or Francis and Zoey talking about macking it up in the back alley would have justified just leaving the group altogether for some people. The fact that we went from these Survivor designs to this just shows that the design philosophy had vastly changed, and it was only during it was a couple year time span. It was a zombie apocalypse that suddenly spread out, having people look completely decked out and battle hardened only 2 weeks after first infection, and what was basically a day or two for them when the zombies started attacking did not make sense. It showed that there was room to improve and work on. Everything originally was going to be darker, less engaging, bloated, and as I've stated multiple times before, less fun for a general repeating gameplay experience. Yeah, you can say the darker environments made it more creepier, but trying to shoot commons, especially on a difficulty like expert, would have made it just unfun. Yeah, the hunter having more abilities like turning invisible, that would be fun for a short period of time, but it would get old going against it. This game was noted and condensed into a perfect gameplay loop that would only be refined more once its sequel, Left 4 Dead 2, would come out merely a year later, using so many of the scrapped ideas and more concept ideas that would go into it. Only Left 4 Dead 2 had just as many changes, revisions, and cut content as the first. Or actually, I think Left 4 Dead 2 had even more changes. But that is a video for a different time. That wraps up this What If timeline look into what Left 4 Dead could have been. What did you think? What were some concepts mentioned here that you would have kept into the final game's release? Did I get some information wrong? Let me know down in the comments below and let's have a civil discussion. Support the channel by chipping in a buck just to be featured on this list here. Doing so either on my Patreon, becoming a YouTube channel member, or donating during my live streams of Left 4 Dead on my second channel, WSG Streams. Also of note, we have some Left 4 Dead merch on sale on my Teespring of the Left 4 Dead survivors in chibi form on a shirt or sticker, so get you one today, link in the description. Until next time, I'm Zach S, aka Wow Such Gaming. Never forget to stay happy, stay healthy, stay better safe than sorry, and never forget to stay wow.